June 15, 1944. 14:37 hours. Camp Forest, Tennessee, USA. The sun hung low over the rolling hills of the Tennessee countryside, casting long shadows across the neatly fenced POW camp. The air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and distant pine, mingling with the faint tang of dust stirred by boots and wheels. Along the dirt field, a group of German prisoners stood stiffly, their eyes narrowing in disbelief at the scene before them. Leather collided with wood, echoing sharply across the camp. A baseball had just been struck by a bat. Laughter followed, high, piercing, and unfamiliar to ears accustomed to the muted tones of military routine. Guards leaned casually against the fence, whistling encouragement, while prisoners shuffled uncertainly toward the makeshift diamond. Some watched silently, curiosity battling suspicion. Others whispered, exchanging glances that betrayed a mix of incredulity and fascination. Here, in the heart of the American South, a war-weary soldier might expect only drills, labor, and monotony. Instead, he found a game, a bat, a ball. Cheers and applause. For a moment, the uniformed enemy and their captors were connected not by orders or fear, but by a simple, baffling, yet profoundly human ritual. Baseball. It was the first time many German prisoners had seen anything like it, and none would forget it. By 1942, the United States was deeply entrenched in a global conflict that had already devastated Europe. The attack on Pearl Harbor had propelled America into war, and soon after, the first waves of German prisoners of war began arriving on American soil. Camp Forest, along with dozens of other sites across the country, from the swamps of Louisiana to the plains of Kansas, was hastily repurposed to house these captives. By 1945, over 400,000 Axis prisoners would live in more than 500 camps scattered across the United States. The United States, bound by the 1929 Geneva Convention, faced the complex challenge of treating these prisoners humanely while ensuring security. The Geneva Convention mandated adequate food, shelter, and medical care, and prohibited forced labor beyond certain limits. For the average German soldier, however, life in an American POW camp was unlike anything experienced on European battlefields. There were no constant artillery barrages, no smoke-filled trenches, no shattered villages. Instead, there were orderly barracks, mess halls, and meticulously maintained grounds. The camps varied widely in size and function. Some, like Camp McCain in Mississippi, held only a few hundred prisoners. Others, such as Camp Forest in Tennessee or Camp Shelby, held tens of thousands. Guards were often young American soldiers, many barely older than the prisoners themselves. Initially, interactions were formal, distant, and colored by mutual suspicion. Prisoners spent their days in rigid schedules, wake-up calls at dawn, roll calls, work assignments ranging from agricultural labor to maintenance, and, eventually, supervised study or vocational training. Food, a critical point of comparison, became an early source of bewilderment. German soldiers were accustomed to simpler rations, often limited by wartime shortages. In contrast, American camps offered 3 hot meals a day, complete with fresh fruit, bread, and occasional luxuries such as canned desserts. For many prisoners, these meals were at first a source of skepticism. Some feared hidden poison or traps. Yet, over weeks, the consistent quality of sustenance began to break down barriers of distrust. Beyond physical needs, American authorities recognized the psychological toll of captivity. Many POWs were young men, displaced from home and front lines, accustomed to hierarchy and routine, yet stripped of agency. In response, The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and camp administrators devised structured recreational programs designed to occupy time, maintain morale, and prevent unrest. Sports, particularly baseball, soon emerged as a central activity. Initially, baseball was intended to promote physical fitness and discipline, but its broader impact, cultural, emotional, and even diplomatic, would exceed expectations. The first encounters between German prisoners and organized American recreation were tentative. Early games were modest affairs, a few prisoners tossing balls in the yard while guards watched. Many Germans regarded these efforts with bewilderment. Baseball, after all, was entirely foreign. In Europe, soldiers' recreation consisted of soccer, boxing, or improvised games in open fields, rarely structured or ceremonial. The sight of organized teams, spectators, cheering, and dedicated fields prompted reactions ranging from curiosity to outright incredulity. One soldier, writing in a camp journal at Camp Aliceville, Alabama in 1943, noted, "They have a game where one man hits a small ball and everyone claps and shouts. At first it seems absurd, but there is a rhythm to it, a strange joy in the simplicity." Across the country, these sentiments were echoed in letters and memoirs. German POWs puzzled over the American capacity for leisure, even amidst war. While the camps remained secure, administrators began to recognize the utility of recreation beyond mere distraction. Sports, music, and theatrical performances reduced tensions, encouraged teamwork, and offered a semblance of normalcy. For the prisoners, however, it became a window into American life, a glimpse of a world very different from the one they had fought against. This first encounter with structured leisure, however, was only the beginning. Baseball, in particular, would emerge not merely as a pastime, but as a symbol of human connection, cultural shock, and ultimately, transformation. The stage was set for games that would astonish and unsettle prisoners, teaching lessons far beyond the rules of the sport. The dusty fields of Tennessee and the neatly chalked baselines were more than recreation. They were a quiet battleground of perception, challenging preconceptions and bridging an ocean of conflict. And on that summer afternoon in 1944, as the bat cracked sharply against the ball, a war-hardened soldier felt something he could never have expected: amazement.
By mid-1943, American POW camps had begun to formalize their recreational programs. Baseball, already a national pastime, quickly became the centerpiece. Camp commanders recognized that encouraging sport could serve multiple purposes. It maintained discipline, improved morale, and, subtly, humanized the prisoners in the eyes of both guards and captives. Fields were leveled, chalk lines drawn, and bats and balls distributed, even crafted on site when supplies ran short. For the German prisoners, these developments were both baffling and alien. Accustomed to the rigid militarism of the Wehrmacht, the sight of men gathering casually, cheering and laughing over a simple game seemed almost absurd. In some camps, initial participation was hesitant. Soldiers approached the diamond tentatively, sizing up the rules, mimicking the Americans, and exchanging wary glances. For many, it felt like a performance rather than a pastime, a strange theater where they were both audience and reluctant actors. Yet curiosity won over suspicion. Letters home and diaries reveal a gradual shift in attitude. A prisoner at Cab Forest wrote in 1944, "We do not understand why they laugh so freely, yet when I swing the bat and feel the ball leave my hand, I feel normal, something I had not felt in years." Baseball became a release, a structured outlet for tension, a distraction from the uncertainty of captivity, and, unexpectedly, a source of pride. American guards and camp administrators observed this transformation with interest. Major General James O'Neill, responsible for several Southern POW camps, reported in correspondence with Washington that prisoners engaged in organized sports were less restless, more cooperative, and visibly healthier both physically and mentally. Camps began to host tournaments, sometimes pitting prisoners from different compounds against each other. The games were officiated by guards, but the players themselves quickly developed their own rivalries and camaraderie. The cultural shock for German prisoners extended beyond the act of playing. They were astonished by the enthusiasm of the crowds. Fellow prisoners, guards, and occasionally American civilians invited to observe. Cheers, clapping, and playful banter were foreign to soldiers trained to endure war in silence or under constant threat. Even the concept of a home run or inning became symbols of an unfamiliar, almost surreal civilian world. Baseball also offered a subtle education in American life. Prisoners learned the rules, developed strategies, and absorbed the rhythms of American speech and humor. Some prisoners even began to emulate American customs, tipping caps, sliding into bases, or playfully taunting opponents. In the process, barriers began to erode. Fear and resentment gave way to curiosity and, in some cases, respect. Labor assignments continued alongside recreation, but the games provided a psychological reprieve. Work in fields, kitchens, and workshops could be grueling, yet the promise of an afternoon game created structure and anticipation. In many camps, Sundays became synonymous with baseball. Players and spectators alike looked forward to these hours, which broke the monotony and offered a glimpse of a world untouched by war's devastation. By the summer of 1944, what began as tentative experimentation had evolved into a central feature of camp life. Baseball diamonds were no longer just fields. They were arenas of exchange, teaching lessons that went beyond physical skill. Prisoners discovered not just a game, but an aspect of American culture that challenged their preconceptions and expanded their understanding of the people they had once considered enemies. These early encounters set the stage for deeper explorations into the phenomenon. How did individual prisoners respond emotionally and psychologically? What effect did the sport have on camp discipline and hierarchy? How did American leaders view the games as tools of control, morale, or diplomacy? The dusty diamonds, chalked lines, and worn bats were no longer mere equipment. They were instruments of transformation. And as the first organized tournaments began, German soldiers realized that in this strange new world, victory on the field mattered as much as survival off it.
For the German prisoners, the baseball diamond became more than a field. It became a mirror reflecting a life they had long forgotten. Soldiers who had endured months on European front lines, witnessing destruction, hunger, and loss, now found themselves staring at an odd mix of camaraderie, competition, and unexpected joy. Early games were hesitant, each swing tentative, each catch met with cautious applause. Yet with every inning, laughter began to filter through the fences. Accounts from Camp Forest and Camp Shelby reveal that some prisoners formed close bonds around the sport. The teamwork required to field a game, communicate plays, and execute strategies demanded trust. Men who had arrived wary, suspicious, or even hostile toward each other began to cooperate in ways reminiscent of a civilian community. The diamond became a microcosm of human connection, a space where fear was replaced by focus, resentment by respect, and uncertainty by shared purpose. Prisoners wrote home about these experiences, often with a mixture of incredulity and wonder. One soldier described a moment during a camp tournament. "We cheered together, laughed together,
and for a brief time it felt as if the war did not exist. I could not understand it, yet I could not resist it. Baseball, in these small human moments, transcended its simple rules. It became a vessel of psychological relief, a bridge between captive and captor, and a reminder of the humanity buried beneath uniform and nationality. The cultural shock experienced by German POWs was profound. Baseball, though a staple of American life, was entirely foreign to most soldiers from Germany. Soccer fields, boxing rings, or informal card games had been their recreational norms. To see disciplined, uniformed men lining up for organized play, cheering wildly, and embracing a pastime centered on precision, patience, and ritual was almost surreal. Many prisoners initially questioned the purpose of the games. Was it a trick, a test, a form of indoctrination? Over time, however, they began to appreciate the cultural significance. Baseball was a language of its own, a lens into American civilian life that no amount of observation from the barracks could replicate. Guards were not just wardens, they were participants, coaches, and sometimes gentle rivals. The game taught unwritten lessons about American social order, leisure, and values. Respect for rules, sportsmanship, and collective joy were on full display, challenging the prisoners' preconceived notions of their enemy. Baseball also introduced prisoners to aspects of American humor, slang, and social interaction. Between innings, men traded quips, gestures, and playful taunts. For many Germans, this was confusing, but also illuminating. They saw Americans as more than adversaries. They were people with rituals, quirks, and a capacity for lightheartedness even during wartime. It was a subtle form of cultural diplomacy, experienced not in parliaments or policy papers, but on dusty diamonds under the summer sun. While baseball may seem simple, the infrastructure and tools behind camp games reveal an unexpected level of planning and ingenuity. Fields had to be leveled, bases measured and secured, and equipment maintained. Bats were often locally sourced, balls manufactured or repaired, and protective gear improvised when needed. For the prisoners, encountering such organized resources was another element of shock. The attention to detail mirrored the precision of military engineering, yet was applied to leisure rather than combat. Beyond the physical equipment, the structure of the games required careful coordination. Tournament schedules were planned to avoid conflict with work assignments. Guards served as referees, and scorekeeping was meticulous. This system introduced prisoners to a form of discipline that was voluntary yet structured, different from military orders, yet familiar in its orderliness. It was a blend of engineering, organization, and psychology, demonstrating how even simple recreational activities could require sophisticated planning. Interestingly, some prisoners adapted quickly, learning the nuances of equipment and field maintenance. They repaired worn gloves, measured foul lines, and even improvised makeshift practice balls. In doing so, they were participating in a microcosm of American ingenuity, a reminder that technical skill could extend beyond factories and battlefields into the realm of everyday life and unexpected entertainment. These three angles, the human, cultural, and technological, begin to illustrate the layered significance of baseball in POW camps. It was not just a diversion, it was a human experiment, a cultural bridge, and a testament to organization and creativity. The growing enthusiasm and adaptation of prisoners naturally leads to the next set of angles: leadership, enemy perspective, and moral implications.
The introduction of baseball into POW camps was not a casual decision. It reflected deliberate leadership strategies. Camp commanders and senior officers recognized that recreation could serve as a tool for maintaining order and discipline. By providing structured activities, they reduced idle time, mitigated potential unrest, and fostered a sense of predictability within the camps. Commanders like Colonel Frank O. Rogers at Camp Forest
viewed sports as a dual-purpose instrument. On the surface, it was leisure, a harmless diversion from men who might otherwise grow restless or despondent. Beneath that, it was subtle management. Prisoners who adhered to schedules, participated in teams, and respected rules on the field were more likely to follow regulations off it. Baseball became a testing ground for behavior, a safe arena where leadership could observe attitudes, cooperation, and morale without confrontation. Interestingly, American officers often encouraged autonomy within the games. Prisoners were allowed to form teams, devise strategies, and even officiate certain matches. This partial self-governance strengthened compliance and boosted engagement, while also demonstrating a nuanced approach to authority. Discipline tempered with trust, control blended with freedom. For many prisoners, this balance was unprecedented. It challenged the rigid hierarchies they had known in military life, teaching lessons about responsibility and collaboration under an unfamiliar form of leadership. For the German soldiers, the presence of baseball and the broader recreational environment created cognitive dissonance. The people they had been trained to view as enemy, Americans, were suddenly engaging in lighthearted, communal activity. Guards and prisoners laughed together, cheered on players, and debated plays, blurring the rigid lines of hostility that had defined their understanding of the war. Letters and memoirs reveal the depth of this shock. One POW at Camp Shelby wrote, "I came expecting cold walls and strict orders. Instead, I see men smiling, shouting, and enjoying themselves. They are not monsters, they are people." Baseball humanized the enemy, presenting Americans not merely as soldiers or captors, but as individuals with culture, humor, and emotions. This recognition challenged ingrained prejudices and introduced a subtle psychological shift. The war, at least in this microcosm, was not purely about destruction. It had spaces for understanding, interaction, and even enjoyment. The games also offered prisoners a sense of agency. By participating, they were no longer passive observers of American power. They were active contributors to a shared experience. For some, this fostered respect for both the rules of the game and the people who enforced them, creating a complex dynamic of rivalry, cooperation, and mutual recognition that transcended the battlefield. Baseball in POW camps also carried profound ethical implications. The U.S. commitment to the Geneva Convention mandated humane treatment, but these recreational programs went further than mere compliance. Providing access to leisure, sports, and cultural activities represented a moral choice: to recognize the prisoner's humanity, to cultivate dignity, and to resist the dehumanization that war so often demands. This ethical dimension did not escape the prisoners. Many German soldiers, accustomed to authoritarian discipline and propaganda, initially viewed such efforts with suspicion. Why would captors invest in their amusement? Over time, however, they came to understand the ethical underpinning. These games were an acknowledgement that, despite conflict, every man retained the right to enjoyment, camaraderie, and mental well-being. In letters and post-war memoirs, prisoners frequently reflected on these gestures as small kindnesses that left lasting impressions, challenging their assumptions about the enemy and reshaping their moral perspective on captivity. Furthermore, the ethical significance extended to American guards and organizers. Facilitating recreation required balancing fairness, impartiality, and responsibility. Tensions could easily arise. Favoritism, disputes, or injuries threatened both morale and authority. Yet through careful planning and ethical guidance, officers maintained order while promoting inclusion, fairness, and respect for the prisoner's dignity. Baseball became both a game and a moral experiment, testing whether humane treatment and structured liberty could coexist with security and control. These angles together, the lens of leadership, the prisoner's evolving view of the enemy, and the ethical framework of recreation, paint a richer picture of baseball's significance in POW camps. It was not merely sport. It was diplomacy, psychology, and human ethics played out on dirt diamonds under the summer sun. The tension, curiosity, and evolving relationships set the stage for the climax, or turning point, the official tournaments and pivotal games that would astonish the prisoners and leave a lasting imprint on camp life.
August 3, 1944. 10:05 hours. Camp Forest, Tennessee, USA. The sun had barely climbed above the horizon when the campgrounds began to stir with unusual energy. Today was no ordinary day. It was the start of the first official inter-compound baseball tournament. Tens of thousands of POWs had been preparing for weeks. Teams were formed, practice sessions held, and rivalries quietly simmered. Guards, usually reserved and detached, wore broad smiles, anticipating a spectacle that would test skill, discipline, and spirit. For the German prisoners, anticipation mingled with disbelief. Some approached the diamond cautiously, unsure if the event was ceremonial, a trap, or a genuine opportunity for competition. The rules were explained in hushed tones, translated carefully by bilingual prisoners who had become intermediaries. As the first whistle blew, signaling the start of the game, a hush fell over the crowd. The bat cracked sharply against the ball, sending it soaring over the infield, and the echoes seemed to carry farther than usual, bouncing off the surrounding barracks. The tournament quickly revealed contrasts between expectation and reality. German players, trained in the precision of military drills, approached the game methodically, calculating angles, anticipating throws, and coordinating plays with meticulous care. Yet the casual exuberance of the Americans, guards and observers cheering, shouting instructions, or laughing at blunders, introduced a rhythm entirely foreign to the prisoners. For a fleeting moment, the battlefield discipline collided with civilian joy, producing both tension and fascination. As the day progressed, remarkable plays unfolded. A young prisoner, barely 19, slid headfirst into second base, narrowly avoiding the tag of a guard acting as shortstop. The crowd erupted in cheers, prisoners clapping and shouting in a mixture of German exclamations and learned American phrases. Onlookers watched astonished. These men, once feared as enemies, were demonstrating skill, courage, and a competitive spirit indistinguishable from any American athlete. But it was not just the athleticism that drew attention. The emotional stakes ran high. Prisoners who had been sullen or withdrawn suddenly came alive, shouting encouragement to teammates, celebrating small victories, and commiserating over errors. In one notable instance, a German pitcher who had been reluctant to participate struck out a feared American opponent, earning the first genuine ovation of his camp life. The joy, the surprise, and the sense of shared humanity all unfolded in a wholly removed from the brutality of war. Beyond the field, observers noted the subtle dynamics at play. Guards took care not to interfere, yet their presence provided reassurance. Scorekeepers maintained meticulous records, announcing results in both English and German. Spectators, initially hesitant, began to participate actively, cheering and gesturing, creating a communal atmosphere. The tournament transformed the camp into a microcosm of society. Hierarchical structures softened, boundaries blurred, and the simple act of playing baseball became a stage for unexpected camaraderie. The tournament also tested resilience and adaptability. Weather shifted abruptly, a sudden rainstorm threatened to cancel a critical game, yet players, prisoners and guards alike, adjusted quickly, dragging tarps, clearing puddles, and continuing with determination. These moments revealed more than skill, they revealed character. The prisoners learned to cooperate under pressure, to respond to setbacks, and to find joy even when conditions were less than ideal. As the final innings approached, the energy reached its peak. Teams that had begun the day with nervous caution now played with confidence, intuition, and a competitive fire that mirrored the intensity of real battlefields, yet carried none of the mortal stakes. Cheers echoed across the camp, a sound that had never before been associated with prisoners. And when the final out was recorded, players on both sides collapsed in laughter and exhaustion, exchanging handshakes, pats on the back, and the first glimmers of genuine friendship. This day marked more than a tournament. It was a turning point in the prisoners' experience, a moment where fear gave way to engagement, skepticism to curiosity, and hostility to respect. For the German soldiers, the crack of the bat and the roar of the crowd became emblematic of something larger, a reminder that life could exist beyond orders, bullets, and boundaries. The games did not erase the war, nor did they diminish the reality of captivity, but they transformed the daily rhythm of camp life, creating a memory that would outlast the barbed wire and guard towers. And as the sun dipped low over the Tennessee hills, the prisoners returned to their barracks, carrying with them something entirely unexpected: pride, exhilaration, and a renewed sense of humanity.
August 4th, 1944. 09:45 hours. Camp Forest, Tennessee, USA. The morning air was thick with anticipation as teams gathered for the second day of the inter-compound baseball tournament. By now, the prisoners had acclimated to the rules, the field, and even the unusual spectacle of cheering Americans. Confidence replaced hesitation, and a quiet energy coursed through the camp. For some German soldiers, this was more than a game. It was a challenge to adapt, to excel, and, in subtle ways, to reclaim a piece of their identity. Among the most notable players was Lieutenant Karl Weber, a former artillery officer from the Eastern Front. Weber had arrived at Camp Forest in early 1944, disillusioned and weary from months of brutal combat. Initially skeptical of the recreational program, he now led his team with precision, calling plays, coordinating signals, and demonstrating unexpected skill as a pitcher. His presence transformed the game. What had been tentative participation became disciplined strategy, a fusion of military training and newfound enjoyment. Fellow prisoners watched with awe as he struck out opponent after opponent, blending athleticism with intelligence honed under entirely different conditions. The tournament also produced moments of camaraderie that transcended the barbed wire. Guards, initially reluctant to mingle, began to celebrate individual achievements alongside the prisoners. When a young German batter hit a home run, a rarity in the unfamiliar sport, he was lifted on the shoulders of his teammates, and even the observing guards clapped in unison. These shared experiences, though framed within the boundaries of captivity, fostered respect, humor, and human connection. Letters and journals from the time frequently describe these interactions as strangely uplifting, a small reprieve from the dehumanizing weight of war. Psychologically, the tournaments had profound effects. Prisoners who had arrived tense, suspicious, and withdrawn began to exhibit visible relaxation and engagement. Participation demanded cooperation, trust, and resilience, qualities that were often suppressed in the fear and isolation of captivity. Officers observed improvements in morale, fewer disputes, and an increase in voluntary involvement in other camp activities, from vocational training to music ensembles. Baseball became a lens through which prisoners could negotiate identity, agency, and even hope within the constraints of confinement. The ripple effects extended beyond individual prisoners. Entire compounds developed rivalries, and the tournaments became social events that drew spectators and participants alike. Teams trained together, strategized, and celebrated collectively. Victory or defeat on the field mattered in a new, constructive way. It offered an outlet for competitive instincts without violence, a controlled arena for ambition, and an opportunity for mutual recognition. The fields of Camp Forest were transformed into classrooms of diplomacy, psychology, and ethics, where the rules of the sport,
paralleled lessons in cooperation, respect, and patience. One particularly striking game involved an inter-compound match between Camp Forest and a smaller satellite camp. The larger camp dominated early innings, but through improvisation, teamwork, and relentless determination, the smaller camp staged a remarkable comeback. When the final out was recorded, the two teams, exhausted and laughing, shook hands across the foul line. Prisoners later recounted that for the first time they felt the unity of effort transcending competition. The guards, too, noted the mood shift, observing that shared achievement fostered trust and broke down barriers of suspicion. Beyond the physical competition, the tournaments produced enduring friendships and memories. Prisoners who had been strangers or rivals now exchanged letters, shared meals, and offered assistance in daily tasks. Baseball had become a social glue, weaving together men from diverse backgrounds and experiences. For many, it was a transformative moment, a realization that connection, enjoyment, and dignity could survive even in captivity. By the end of the tournament, the impact was unmistakable. The German prisoners had not only learned the mechanics of a foreign sport, but also internalized lessons in strategy, adaptation, and human interaction. The games reshaped perceptions. Americans were not merely captors, they were human, capable of kindness, humor, and fairness. For the prisoners, this revelation challenged long-held assumptions, expanded their understanding of the enemy, and left an indelible impression that would endure long after their release. As the sun set on the final game, players and spectators lingered on the field, reluctant to leave. The dirt, the chalk lines, and the worn bats had become symbols of transformation, a microcosm of what was possible when discipline met freedom, competition met cooperation, and captivity met humanity. And while the war continued beyond the fences, within the bounds of the camp, the prisoners experienced a rare victory, one not measured in territory or firepower, but in shared joy, respect, and human connection.
August 10, 1944. Camp Forest, Tennessee, USA. The crack of bats and the roar of cheers had faded, but the impact of the tournaments lingered in the camp like a new rhythm woven into daily life. Officers noted a subtle but unmistakable shift. Prisoners who had once moved through barracks and work details with tense, wary steps now walked with a measured confidence, a lighter step, and an openness that had been absent before. Baseball, though just a game, had become a lens through which behavior, morale, and community could be observed. Major General James O'Neill, overseeing multiple POW camps in the southern United States, remarked in correspondence that structured recreation produced observable improvements in prisoner cooperation, compliance, and overall morale. Guards reported fewer disputes during work assignments and a noticeable decrease in disciplinary incidents. The tournaments had channeled competitive energy into a controlled environment, transforming what might have been frustration or rebellion into focus, teamwork, and shared purpose. Prisoners themselves reflected on the changes. In letters home, some described a sense of regained agency, a rare autonomy in a world defined by barbed wire and strict orders. One soldier wrote, "I never believed a simple game could make a difference, yet we laughed, argued, celebrated, and respected one another in ways impossible under ordinary conditions." Baseball reminded us that we were still men, not just prisoners. Such sentiments were repeated across camps, revealing a profound psychological transformation that extended beyond the diamond. The tournaments also created social hierarchies within the prisoner population that differed from those imposed by military rank. Skilled players gained respect regardless of prior status, while teamwork and cooperation became more valued than individual authority. This shift had tangible effects on daily camp life. prisoners were more willing to assist one another with chores, share resources, and resolve disputes amicably. Baseball had introduced a new social order based not on fear or coercion, but on skill, collaboration, and shared experience. Observers took note of the effect on camp culture as a whole. Mess halls became livelier, work details more organized, and small acts of creativity flourished. Prisoners organized informal practice sessions, crafted makeshift equipment, and even devised new rules for variation games. The energy that had once been pent up and potentially destructive now found a constructive outlet. Baseball had transformed the camp from a place of monotony and tension into a dynamic environment, where participation, discipline, and enjoyment coexisted. Even for prisoners who did not actively participate in the games, the psychological impact was significant. The tournaments offered entertainment, a sense of community, and a distraction from the monotony of confinement. Guards reported that casual spectators began attending regularly, cheering and engaging in light-hearted banter with players. The shared experience blurred lines between captor and captive, creating moments of mutual recognition and even friendship, however tentative. The aftermath of the tournaments also had a tangible effect on morale and health. Camp medical officers noted lower levels of stress, improved sleep patterns, and fewer complaints of illness among prisoners actively involved in recreational activities. The physical activity, combined with the social engagement, contributed to both mental and physical well-being, a remarkable outcome in a setting defined by confinement and uncertainty. Yet perhaps the most enduring effect was the transformation in perspective. German prisoners, previously viewing their captors solely as authority figures or adversaries, began to recognize their humanity. They observed Americans as individuals capable of fairness, humor, and compassion. This subtle shift in perception had long-lasting consequences. It tempered resentment, fostered compliance without coercion, and planted seeds of empathy that would survive the duration of captivity and even influence post-war reflections. By the end of August 1944, it was clear that the baseball tournaments had accomplished more than any administrator could have predicted. They had not changed the war, nor had they diminished the reality of imprisonment. But within the confines of the camps, they had reshaped human behavior, morale, and social structure. They had transformed simple fields of dirt and chalk into arenas of psychological resilience, cultural exchange, and unexpected diplomacy. The success of these tournaments set the stage for examining their broader, long-term consequences. How prisoners remembered these games after the war, the lasting impact on relationships between captives and guards, and the lessons for humane treatment in military contexts.
September 1945. Camp Forest, Tennessee, USA. The war had ended in Europe months earlier, yet the echoes of laughter and the crack of bats lingered in the memories of those who had lived through the POW experience. For German soldiers who had once regarded baseball with skepticism, the games had become emblematic of something far greater than recreation, a rare space of agency, connection, and human dignity amid captivity. Post-war memoirs revealed the depth of this impact. Lieutenant Carl Weber, a standout player during the 1944 tournaments, reflected decades later. I arrived at Camp Forest expecting walls, guards, and endless monotony. Instead, I found a diamond where we could be men again. For a few hours, we were not prisoners, but competitors, teammates, and friends. That memory has stayed with me longer than many battles ever could. Such recollections were common across camps, repeated in letters, interviews, and diaries, preserved in archives and family collections. The broader implications of the tournaments extended beyond individual experiences. American military officials recognized that structured recreation served as an effective tool for managing large prisoner populations. Reports from the War Department highlighted that camps offering organized sports had fewer disciplinary incidents, higher compliance with work assignments, and greater overall morale. Baseball had proven itself not only as a leisure activity, but as a psychological instrument, capable of shaping behavior, promoting cooperation, and fostering respect across cultural divides. In some camps, tournaments were preserved in photographs and local newspaper accounts, capturing moments that seemed almost surreal. German soldiers laughing, cheering, and celebrating with their American guards. These images, later circulated in post-war histories, reinforced the unusual but effective humanization of the enemy. They also offered lessons for military leadership. Even in the midst of conflict, humane treatment and shared activities could transform relationships, reduce tension, and cultivate resilience. The tournament's impact was also cultural. German prisoners who returned home after the war often recalled baseball with nostalgia and fascination, sometimes introducing the sport to communities unfamiliar with it. In interviews conducted decades later, former POWs spoke of how their brief exposure to American leisure culture broadened their understanding of civilian life in the United States, creating lasting impressions that endured far beyond the confines of the camps. Equally significant was the ethical dimension. The games demonstrated that humane treatment was not merely compliance with international law, but a moral choice with tangible effects. Providing access to recreation, fostering fair competition, and encouraging participation reflected an acknowledgement of the prisoner's dignity. These principles influenced post-war thinking about the treatment of captives, contributing to evolving standards of international military ethics. Even within the camps, baseball had left physical and psychological marks. Diamonds were preserved, bats repaired or kept as mementos, and tournament records cataloged. Stories of remarkable plays, extraordinary teamwork, and moments of unexpected levity became part of camp lore, passed down orally and through written accounts. These narratives reinforced a shared sense of humanity, bridging the gulf between former enemies and reminding both prisoners and guards that camaraderie could survive even the harshest circumstances. By the time the last German POWs were repatriated, the legacy of baseball in the camps was firmly established. It was remembered not as a trivial distraction, but as a transformative experience, an exercise in discipline, strategy, and emotional resilience, a cultural bridge, and a moral experiment demonstrating the power of shared human activity. The tournaments, the laughter, and the friendships forged on dusty fields were small victories in a world defined by loss and destruction, yet their significance endured far beyond the barbed wire fences. The story of these baseball games sets the stage for reflection, a final contemplation on what they reveal about humanity, conflict, and the surprising ways in which ordinary joy can transform extraordinary circumstances. The diamond, the bat, and the echo of a cheering crowd might seem inconsequential against the backdrop of a global conflict. Yet within the confines of POW camps, baseball became something far greater than a game. It was a quiet rebellion against despair, a lesson in human connection, and a testament to the resilience of spirit. Soldiers who had endured the front lines of Europe found themselves confronted not by bombs or bullets, but by laughter, cheers, and the simple rhythm of a ball in motion. In those moments, the lines between captor and captive blurred. The German prisoners discovered the humanity of their guards. The Americans witnessed the individuality, skill, and dignity of their prisoners. The sport became a shared language, transcending nationalities, ideologies, and the rigid hierarchies of war.
Through swings, slides, and home runs, lessons emerged about trust, cooperation, and the surprising power of leisure to heal, educate, and transform. Beyond the fields of Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi, the legacy of these games endures as a reminder of what is possible even in the harshest circumstances. They illustrate that war, while defined by destruction and division, does not have to extinguish the capacity for joy, curiosity, or respect. Structured play became an act of diplomacy, a tool of morale, and a subtle moral experiment, showing that empathy and structured freedom could coexist with authority and order. For historians, the tournaments are a window into a rarely examined aspect of warfare, the human dimension. For former prisoners, they remain memories of laughter and fleeting liberation. And for all of us, they offer a timeless lesson that even amid conflict, even in war, there exists the possibility for connection, respect, and joy, a lesson far more lasting than the war itself.